I'm here with now Lord Toby Young, but Toby has been a leading light around issues of free speech, the Daily Sceptic in response to measures imposed during the period of COVID, and of course The Spectator. And today, I believe, is your 5th birthday at Free Speech Union. You've got thousands more members joining all the time. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's our 5th birthday today. It surpassed my expectations. I mean, I thought it was going to be needed when I set it up in 2020, but I did think that we'd reached rock bottom when it came to attacks on free speech in this country, which turned out to be incredibly naive. Things then got worse by an order of magnitude, partly as a result of the lockdown being imposed a month after we started, and that suddenly meant reams of people were being cancelled for criticising the lockdown policy, even for speculating about the origins of the virus, accused of trafficking in conspiracy theories, misinformation, disinformation. So suddenly a whole new class of people, many of them doctors and scientists, started being cancelled as a result of the pandemic. And then, of course, you had the Black Lives Matter imbroglio because of the death of George Floyd, and then suddenly people started being cancelled for questioning whether Britain was a systematically racist country and so forth. So suddenly we were overwhelmed with requests for help, and we've gradually scaled up. We've now got 25 members of staff. We've got 26,500 members. We're growing, as you said, at the rate of about 1,000 members a month. We fought over 2,300 cases over the last 5 years. Incredibly, I think it comes as a surprise to many people, that the people we defend, the largest single category in our case database, are gender-critical women. Feminists who believe in the biological reality of sex and complain to their employers that they don't want to have to share bathrooms with biological men, or they don't want to use the gender pronouns of their trans colleagues, and get into all kinds of trouble, sometimes lose their jobs, get kicked out of universities. They're at the front line. People think that it's people like me, conservatives, getting on in life, white-skinned, heterosexual, that we're the ones, at the coalface when it comes to defending free speech. Not a bit of it. The people at the coalface are women, mostly women who identify as left-wing, who are defending sex-based women's rights. I didn't think, when I set up the Free Speech Union, that those would be the people I'd be going into bat for, but it turns out they need our help more than anyone else, and it's been great, actually, to ally ourselves with the TERFs. They're fantastic campaigners, they're incredibly courageous, they're very clear about what it is they believe in. It enables us to say that we're a non-partisan organisation. We're not politically biased. We don't just defend conservatives. We defend anyone who gets into trouble for exercising their right to free speech.
I think it's really important. There's a very lazy shorthand that people say it's just far right. Somehow free speech has become seen as far right by some people. But at your event yesterday, it was very notable that, it's in all circles, Toby, right? Amongst what people call themselves the freedom fraternity. I've been at events where people want to just, because they're so angry, and it has been legacy media mainly saying these things, that they don't really want to hear any more of that stuff, and they might shout a bit and heckle or even say don't speak. But actually we've got to have those debates and discussions, those ideas we really detest out there. And Michael Schellenberger said, well, we all say we might want free speech, but we may have to defend things we really find reprehensible to be said. And then there was even a bit of a kerfuffle, not a kerfuffle, but people disagreeing at the event. And that's healthy, isn't it? We need that. We're strong enough to cope with that, aren't we?
I think we are. I think, one of the shortcomings of the censors who J.D. Vance kind of lit into at the Munich Security Conference, the European elites who are terrified of populism and who think that any challenge to globalization, to mass migration, to the climate change agenda is really dangerous, really toxic, and they need to do everything they can to silence those voices lest they erupt in a dangerous nationalist far-right political movement which ends up resembling Nazism. They've got this kind of pathological fear of a resurgence of fascism in Europe, and that's why they're so sensitive, so easily triggered by people dissenting, people challenging their kind of sacred beliefs. We can't be as sensitive as them. We have to take it on the chin when people challenge us and when people express ideas that we find objectionable or even say things we find deeply offensive. We can't complain about them censoring others if we then get into the censorship game ourselves. One of the great quotes I ever heard about free speech was from the legendary ex-head of the ACLU. He said that when you've got the enemy in your sights, imposing free speech restrictions can be a good idea, like releasing poison gas. You think, I'm winning, I'm now going to prosecute the other side, I'm going to push home my advantage by restricting them from saying what they really think. It's like releasing poison gas. You release it, and then the wind changes. And that's what I say to people on the radical progressive left who think there isn't much point in defending free speech. It's like, well, you may not think there's much point now because you're in the ascendancy and everything is going your way, but what if the wind changes? And the wind is changing. You're going to need those free speech protections yourself in due course, so it's very short-sighted to toss them aside now.
So it's really remarkable. I was a founding member. I was really inspired because we should remember back, it isn't that long ago, and it was quite terrifying. People can, I think I can be sometimes brave, but you can get very scared. If you start saying things about the trans or sex-based right questions or issues of critical race theory, if you happen to have a job that you don't want to lose or any of those things, it can be terrifying. And that climate's changed. You've had a substantial impact on that with the Free Speech Union. The idea that it's not just you, it will be people that will come in defence. Together, we're really passionate, as you know, about getting the public engaged in things, in speaking to MPs and councillors and marching as well and doing that part, because I love it here and I think it's really good. But sometimes I get a sense that it's not, it's been caricatured by some of the organisers even. This may be a different kind of Davos for people of the centre and the right. But where do you see the role of the public, the demos, that sense of what the public can do in all of this?
Oh, I think it's. I think ultimately, it is the great British public that are the last line of defence. We had a really fantastic victory a couple of weeks ago when Jamie Michael, an ex-Royal Marine, was prosecuted for a video he posted on Facebook, in which he linked the Southport murders to illegal immigration. And it turned out the murderer wasn't an illegal immigrant, but it was an innocent mistake. He certainly wasn't the only one to make it. And he wasn't urging people to burn down asylum hotels. He was urging people to protest peacefully about illegal immigration. And he was prosecuted at the behest of a couple of Labour politicians in Wales. And he was charged with stirring up racial hatred. There was a trial. If he'd been found guilty, he faced 7 years in jail. I mean, that's the maximum sentence. But he pleaded not guilty. He threw the dice and said, I'm going to trust my fate to a jury of my peers, which is a right we enjoy, dating back to the Magna Carta. And it took a jury all of 17 minutes to acquit him, to find him not guilty, unanimously. And that's who we can rely on. That is the last line of defense. If you're charged with a speech offense, a speech crime, and you think that what you said was defensible, and it's what you really genuinely believe, then don't automatically plead guilty in the hope of getting a reduced sentence. It may be that you can rely on the good sense of 12 ordinary people to find you not guilty.
Just on that, so there are over 70 people who were imprisoned over the summer, not for violent deeds, but for posts online. And so, to your point, they did plead guilty. I think that perhaps because of maybe not having great representation, being nervous, being told certain things, there may be some kind of deals. But different to, for instance, the work you've done with people, including Bernie Spofforth and Alison Pearson and all of that, where you can see there's robust representation. Is there any hope for that? How do you see that? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's tragic that so many people pleaded guilty and so many of them ended up in prison, including one man who committed suicide. Had they all pleaded not guilty, I'm sure fewer than 10% would have ended up in jail. I'm sure the majority would have been acquitted. What can we do for them? We can try and get their sentences reduced. We can say they were poorly advised. Had they been better advised, they would have pled not guilty and probably been acquitted. I'm hoping we've got a few cases of people who are currently languishing in jail for hurty words on social media in connection with the Southport attacks. And we are trying to appeal their sentences, and we may have some success with that. But it's obviously a great deal easier to help them if they plead not guilty in the first place.
You also talked today on a post, you were asked if you also, I think it was an attempt to try and shame you somehow, but if you were defending people speaking up for Palestinian rights and others, and you made a similar point that you represent anyone from a free speech point of view. You say a conservative, these terms are, I don't want to, we're not postmodernists, right? And I think things mean things. But also there's a lot of people who used to be on what they would call the left that value things like free speech and others. Yeah. Well, how do you see the contours now today? What are the things that unite people and separate them? How are you understanding all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite fluid. Things are changing fast, and we see all kinds of strange alliances. I mean, the most obviously strange one, and which you see here, is the alliance between evangelical Christians and gender-critical feminists. I mean, they profoundly disagree about a lot of things, not least reproductive rights. But to a great extent, they've allied themselves with Donald Trump and with reform, because those are the people standing up now for sex-based women's rights, particularly when it comes to women's sports. So, it's interesting. You see alliances like that emerging. It throws everything up in the air. And I think of maybe a better way of looking at it is to contrast people who are authoritarian with people who are more libertarian. That seems to be a better lens through which to try and interpret what's happening than the left-right lens.
So I was in Scotland and in Edinburgh when the Hate Crime Act was made into law. I mean, obviously, terrible moment. But exactly what you said, there were people, there were nationalists, there were unionists, there were people of faith, secular. And even in that moment of what I would say is defeat somewhat, there was a sense of possibility, an exciting moment where people were fighting and challenging in education and across the board. I think through these conversations and through engaging with the public, that's how we can get these things checked, as well as doing the immediacy. You're putting the fires out in many ways and having the conversations and going out there. We very much like to see the public get more engaged and have their voices heard, as well as being good peers and jurists. Because we have seen some of the judiciary get weaponised with the two-tier thing. I suppose I want to finish on the PM. We saw what was said. I want to see what your reflections are on this, because over the summer he threatened more impositions on free speech, banning orders for travelling, like we've seen with football and others, I suppose, and then but for speculating. They're allowed to speculate, it seems. The Prime Minister and Yvette and others, about everyone being far right or neo-Nazis. But when someone speculates, could this possibly be something linked to a jihadi idea that someone kills loads of children? That's seen as beyond the pale too far. And then in addition to that, it seems like our Prime Minister doesn't want to engage with the public. Last week we were doing something with the farmers, he ran off, and then he's saying he wants to defend freedom in Ukraine with our soldiers, but not do that here. Many people are wondering about that. Yeah. How do you see the situation around that? Just that what's happened since the riot, since August, the free speech question, and where we're at now? Just big, broad question.
Well, I mean, a great example of what you were referring to is that many people got into trouble for, as you say, speculating about the attacker, his motives, his religion, on the grounds that was contempt of court. We can't prejudice his trial by speculating about his motive, his identity. That might prejudice a jury. And yet, the official Home Office Twitter feed retweeted something that the Crown Prosecution Service's official Twitter feed. They boasted about having arrested over 1,000 people in connection with the Southport disturbances, including people who just said hurty words. And they were described by the Home Office official Twitter feed as criminals. What's that if not presupposing their guilt? What's that if not prejudging, likely to influence how a jury views them? So yeah, there is certainly a two-tier standards when it comes to contempt of court, prejudicing trials. I don't think Keir Starmer made a particularly good fist of uniting the country in the wake of those murders and the unrest. I don't think people who were angry about illegal immigration, even if they were wrongly linking the attacks in Southport to illegal immigration, nevertheless, there's clearly a great deal of public anger about that. They've been voting for parties who've said they're going to reduce immigration, particularly illegal immigration, for decades. And it just keeps on going up and up and up. And they see the small boats arriving every day. And of course they're angry. They're angry that they're being ignored, that their communities are changing so rapidly before their eyes. They're angry about not being able to get social housing or a GP appointment or into a good school. And to dismiss them all as far right, as outside agitators, as kind of racist bigots, was, I thought, not the act of a statesman able to bring the country together at this kind of divisive, important, critical time. It felt very much like the voice of the 20% of the electorate who voted for Labour. The fact that he's willing to pander to his base, govern in such a partisan way, only speak for, the radical progressive minority, I think makes him a terrible Prime Minister and a really divisive one.
Final thoughts, because I know you're going to get off and you've got this big night tonight as well. What's the American effect, the Trump effect, a Republican Party full of Democrats in the cabinet at the front of it? How do you see the next couple of years here in Britain? What's going to be the impact of all of that?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, on the one hand, the fact that Trump and his administration have embraced all these causes we've been embracing, like lockdown skepticism, like defending sex-based women's rights, making sure that science is prioritized over scientism, that enables all the enemies of those things over here and in Europe to code them now as far right and whip up opposition to them on the grounds that this is the kind of thing that Trump is doing. How can you possibly align yourself with this white supremacist monster? But on the other hand, we heard from J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference last week that unless Europe gets its act together, unless it stops censoring dissenters and trying to silence critics of the regime, America may have second thoughts about protecting Europe under its nuclear umbrella. So that could be really important. I mean, it may be, a lot of noise was made about that, particularly by German politicians. How dare this imperialist try and impose this dogma on free European countries like ours. But actually, behind the scenes, they may be thinking, crikey, if we continue to aggressively clamp down on dissent and prosecute people for trafficking in mis and disinformation, which really just means expressing a point of view I disagree with, then it could be that America is going to withdraw from, the transatlantic alliance, which would be catastrophic. So I think on balance, Trump and Vance are probably a good thing and will have a positive impact in Europe on free speech.
Toby Young, thank you very much.
Thanks, Alan.